Hello again, everyone. Let's get started on our last session of the day. This is a kind of a different panel than I think may have been had at previous conferences. This is actually my first South Dakota History Conference, so it's all new to me. So we thought it would be really great for you to hear from the directors of each of the branches of the Historical Society and about what their resources are in terms of World War II or what they've been up to or a little bit of both. And then you can maybe just feel a little more connected with all of the various parts that are subsumed under the Historical Society. So we're going to start with Ted Spencer, who is the State Historic Preservation Officer, and then we will turn to Katy Schmidt, who is the Museum Curator, and then to Chelle Somsen, who is the Director of the State Archives, and then I'm going to give reports for everybody else who are doing other things. So without further ado, Ted Spencer.
Hey, everybody. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're enjoying the conference so far. I'm just going to give a quick overview of the State Historic Preservation Office because I find as I travel around the state and even around the country, a lot of people are like, I'm not sure exactly what they do. I get calls about, hey, I want to donate a manuscript, and I say, you need to go talk to State Archives, Chelle, or hey, I've got this really neat artifact that's, I think it's historic, and it's this really strange-looking cross thing, and I go, you need to talk to Katy in museums if you want to donate that or have someone look at it. So there's confusion on what a State Historic Preservation Office does. So real quick, and I'm just going to make sure to advance the slide. I hit the green? Okay, yeah, so we'll get into this real quick. And I apologize for a lot of our trustees, former trustees, and some of those that attended the CLG conference, like Dawn and Sunny and Laura, you've seen this before, so bear with me. You can't ask any questions then. Okay. So the National Historic Preservation Act from 1966 established all these state historic preservation offices, okay? And what that did is basically it created 59 SHPOs across all 50 states plus the 9 U.S. territories. So the National Historic Preservation Act not only did that, creating the SHPO offices, but it also had some other requirements that came along with that. One of those was the National Register of Historic Places. They said SHPOs are responsible to facilitate identifying and recording National Register of Historic Places and getting those approved via the Park Service under the Department of Interior. They've also established the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, and that's the presidential appointed committee that does high-level strategic review of major projects or things that SHPOs need assistance with or their review with. We actually have one of the ACHP members here, Jay Vogt, sitting in the back of the room next to Ben there, our director. And then, of course, like I said, the SHPOs were created. And then they created all these tribal historic preservation offices. We have 9 federally recognized tribal reservations in South Dakota, and 8 of those 9 tribes have a TIPO, or Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. Lower Brule does not. They have a Cultural Resource Management Office that does many of the same functions as the TIPO, but they chose not to have a TIPO designated individual for their reservation. So at the state level, basically what we're doing is we're just trying to preserve the state's heritage, history, and I should say culture. And there's a lot of words here on this slide that I won't go into, but it's just kind of a big picture here is we're the primary agency that's working to preserve that for the state. So then people say, well, what's a historic property? Well, the definition is any prehistoric or historic district, site, building, structure, or object included in or eligible for inclusion in the National Register of Historic Places. And they can include traditional religious, cultural type of properties, especially that's important to our Indian tribes here in the state. Can include things like Tabor, Wenceslas Church there. It's a big cemetery, is a very culturally significant cemetery to the Czech immigrants, as an example. It is an honorific designation, but it also opens you up for some eligibility if your property is listed as a National Register of Historic Places site to some financial incentive programs. Some of the activities we do are acquisition, protection, stabilization, rehabilitation, preservation, restoration. Don Zeller. Okay, Don, here's your chance. Where you at? There you are. Okay, go ahead, tell them. Yeah. That's him up there with some volunteers from the State Highway Patrol doing a community outreach for the Highway Patrol. But yeah, we're responsible for the Owyhee Chapel on top of Owyhee Dam, and we do periodic restoration, maintenance work on that. We're also responsible for the Verandry Monument over in Fort Pierre, as well as the Fort Pierre Chateau National Historic Landmark, and that's over in Fort Pierre as well. So another very, very important function of our office is to do review and compliance. And we have a federal process called Section 106, which basically they want to put in a big wind farm, they want to put in pipelines. Public utilities have a major right-of-way for a new utility line. They've all have to be reviewed in terms of any sort of impacts they may have to our state's culturally significant or historic resources. And that's what our review and compliance staff does in the office. And a corollary to that is we have a state-level program, which is SDCLA, South Dakota Codified Law 1-19A11-1. And that's kind of similar to the federal level process where we've got to review these projects if it's a state agency or a state entity performing these actions or a local governmental entity. City of Sioux Falls wants to put in a new facility somewhere, and it may have an impact on some archaeological resources on this piece of vacant land they may have. So we've got to review that. Any federal undertakings or federal connection, public utilities still have to get an interconnection, and usually that's through the Western Area Power Administration. That's part of the Department of Energy. So there is your federal connection. If there's any federal agency involvement, they've got to go through this process for review to make sure we're not adversely impacting our historic cultural resources. The other thing we do is we administer financial incentive programs. We got the state property tax moratorium, federal income tax credit for major developments and or minor developments. We do provide brick and mortar type grants for restoration of historic residences or historic buildings through our Deadwood Fund Grant program. Of course, everything has to meet the Secretary of Interior standards for historic preservation. So kind of some neat slides here for some of the economic impacts. People don't realize, well, okay, yeah, that's nice, that's good. But what really plays to kind of, I say, our practical South Dakotan ears is show me the money. Like, well, what's it mean in my pocketbook? Well, it's actually quite a bit. Heritage tourism accounts for a significant portion of those tourism dollars. It is a very green activity. It provides jobs within the local economies, primarily when you're restoring and rehabilitating something in the local area. And you can read a lot of the specifics here on the slide, but there's some definite economic benefits. Numerous studies and analysis through the years have bore this out. Again, just to reiterate, and the latest numbers I had for this was fiscal year 2020, so those are some of the figures that I was able to pull up in terms of the economic impacts. So it's not just, oh, gee whiz, nice to have things. And yeah, our heritage and culture is important. But again, for those more practically minded people, I'll say legislators possibly, there's some real economic benefits here. And they listen, their ears perk up when you say economic benefits to the state. They pay attention. And of course, there's the green aspect. It's a very environmental friendly activity when you restore something that's already existing. You're restoring some of that old growth forest wood that's used in some of these older structures, or some of this sandstone that's out there in some of our communities. Instead of tearing everything down, hauling it to the landfill, that's a problem right there. And now you've got to source all new materials to build something new. So preservation is very green. So it has the environmental, the economic impacts, and cultural, obviously. And then our legacy for our state. Why preserve? Well, our legacy and our culture is important. Let's not discount that either. You have to think of, and I'm speaking to the choir here, I know, but you have to have a sense of where you came from to kind of know where you're going. And our history can do that for us. So I won't really go into some of the trends here for our office in particular, but we're struggling in terms of trying to find qualified people in the SHPOs right now. It's just, that great resignation you read and hear about, and the lack of workers out there. We're experiencing that, trying to man the offices. We are getting more and more federal outlays to do historic preservation, cultural resource management, so that's good. And we're also trying to be a little more diverse and inclusive. The kind of history that's kind of, I'll say, dogmatic history from the past kind of had one perspective, probably the Eurocentric, perspective, but you need to bring in other inclusive, diverse groups to give their perspective on, you may look at the Battle of the Little Bighorn this way, but you talk to Lakota Sioux, and he'll say, oh, no, you got it wrong. This is actually how this all transpired and how this happened. You need that perspective and that balance to history, so that's important. My wrap-up here is just, we talked about the economic benefits. We talked about the cultural and historic importance of preserving what we have right now for our future generations, and the environmental benefits. But it's usually it's a win-win proposition. Once you explain this to people and they realize the positives versus just tearing something down and starting from scratch, they usually realize this is the way to go. You can go to Aberdeen, Mitchell, Huron, and you see a strip mall, and they all look the same. A little parking area, a little block building, a strip mall, and big deal. But, Laura Ingalls Wilder surveyor's house in De Smet, those Carnegie libraries that are maintained in these communities, Wiley Park, there in Aberdeen. It's very unique, and it's important, and what makes those communities stand out. And that's what it's really all about. So, thank you.
All right, so my name's Katy Schmidt. I'm the curator of collections for the museum up at the Cultural Heritage Center. So my job is to take care of the artifacts that are in the museum collections and that we exhibit and do research with. So I have one of the cooler jobs, I think. So I'll focus today on some of the items that we have that are more World War II centered. So we have a wide variety of artifacts in the collection that are related to World War II. one of the biggest collections of which is our collection of uniforms. I believe we have a uniform from every branch that was active during World War II, both male uniforms, female uniforms, service uniforms, dress uniforms, you name it, I probably have it in the collection. You can see these are a couple of our cabinets that house our uniforms. You can see how full they are. So that is one of the things with our upcoming renovations, with storage issues, hoping to help house our uniform collection a lot better in the future as well. Armaments. Guns, we have a very large gun collection, which is very South Dakota appropriate. But we don't have just American guns in the collection. We have German guns. I put a German pistol up here. We have a Japanese rifle, various European firearms as well that made their way back in the hands of American veterans after the war. We also have different kinds of weaponry, bayonets, bladed weapons, daggers, swords, and including some artillery, all of which has been safely demilled, so we don't have to worry about any unexpected explosions up at the Cultural Heritage Center, which is something we are very, very aware of, especially when it comes to our military collections. So safety is paramount with that collection. We also have all kinds of equipment from World War II. This is a very small sampling. Dog tags, gas masks, mess kits, various goggles, first aid kits. The little item up in the corner is a sewing kit. So that might not be something that you often think about needing on the front, but if you have a tear in your uniform or your boot breaks down, you need to be able to repair it. So that is, while it's a very small artifact, it is something that was vitally important as well. The gas masks are another artifact that we do have to be careful with sometimes. If it was exposed to dangerous chemicals, potentially we have to be aware of that in the handling of those kind of artifacts. So while we do our best to preserve stuff, we also need to take care of ourselves and be safe when we are handling these things. Another connection that we have a lot of in the museum is posters. And these range widely from home fronts kind of posters. We have some posters encouraging women to can food during the war. Of course, rationing was a very big part of the home front during the 1940s. And also victory gardens. I think some people have probably heard that phrase before. People, especially in the Midwest, where you were able to grow your own food, that was something that was vitally important to the American home fronts. War bonds and stamps, that middle poster there, that was a big push as well. Some financial contributions to the war efforts. We also have some very interesting civil defense items, brochures, posters, maps, leaflets. There's one, I didn't get a good picture of it, but what to do in case of an air raid. You don't think in South Dakota that you would worry about that. We're pretty far inland, but they did have procedures for that. And also another one that I can think of is what to do in a blackout. So they were very much preparing in case the worst happened. Another one is postcards, and some of these are quite funny. Just picked out 3 right there. We have dozens of postcards in the collection from World War II. A lot of geared towards soldiers to send back home. And of course, they do have some interesting notes on the back as well. Not all of them were used, but it is a very special thing to flip over those postcards and really get a firsthand account of the training. I'm getting ready to be deployed to Europe or the Pacific, and these are kind of like their last notes home before they go out. So they're a fascinating just artifact and also a firsthand account of what was going on. One of my personal interests in World War II is women in the armed forces during World War II. We have rather good collections of artifacts from the waves and the walks. If you don't know, the waves were the Navy side, so it stands for Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service. Sometimes it was also known as the Navy Women's Reserve. We have uniforms, booklets, magazines for the waves. The walks, the Women's Army Corps or Women's Auxiliary Army Corps is another one that was very common. Unfortunately, we don't have any WASP items. I know there are South Dakota WASPs, so if anyone has anything, a WASP in their family that they would like to donate some stuff to the museum, I'd be happy to hear about that. In the exhibit side of the museum, you can come and see some of these artifacts. We have in our Changing Times gallery, it's closer to the end, close to the exits, there is a case that is dedicated to South Dakota veterans, and a large portion of that case is dedicated to World War II specifically. So you can see some of the items on display there, one of the Waves uniforms, some various armaments. One of the interesting things, you can't really see it very well, up in the corner is a Japanese balloon bomb. So that is exactly what it sounds like. It's a bomb that was attached to a balloon and floated over the United States. That one did land in South Dakota, but it did not go off, luckily. It just was kind of a dud, I guess. And then another very important piece that we have is a Congressional Medal for the Sioux Code Talkers. And we also have a very interesting interactive activity that we worked very hard on that is related to the Sioux Code Talkers, where you can try to create your own code using the Lakota language. We do allow research in the museum collection. That's something that I don't think people often think about when they think about the museum. They think about the exhibits, going there and physically looking at the stuff. But I do take research requests on a case-to-case basis. So if you're interested in doing research in the museum, all you have to do is contact me personally. So, thank you. Right.
We good? Okay. Katy, you're short. I'm Chelle Somsen. I'm the state archivist for the State Archives, and I was going to focus on some of our collections and that we have, and I picked out several of them, and just going to kind of highlight why I thought they were kind of interesting. So I'm going to start, and it's very interesting that Katy mentioned the waves. So this first one is a collection Joanne Kotsitsky Klein. She enlisted in the Waves shortly after her 20th birthday, 1944. That's her on the left-hand side of that small group photo, and then in the larger group photo, she's the second row from the top right in the center. She was born in Winter, South Dakota, and so when she enlisted, she traveled to New York, was there for 6 weeks, and she went into areographer's training school, which meant that she became more of an expert on meteorology and physical oceanography, which is what she was very interested in. She worked at the Naval Communication Annex in D.C., involving all of the weather coding. Toward the end of the war, she was transferred to the Naval Air Station in Texas, then transferred back to Annapolis, Maryland, and she completed her enlistment in Philadelphia. When she was done with her enlistment, she was an areographer mate 2C, and then she came back to South Dakota and went to USD, where she got both her bachelor's degree and master's degree in math. And so we just thought that I thought that this was a very interesting collection. And so in addition to those 2 photos that you saw, there's also these 2 books that came with her collection. One is the U.S. Naval Training School handbook, and the other one is the reference manual. And I was flipping through that one, and it was very interesting. It's got lots of images of ships, and it tells you which ones they were, and different types of aircraft, and the communications and signaling that they had to know in order to get through all of their training. And I thought that was very interesting. So that's why I picked that collection to highlight for you. The next one here is a collection from Alma Holub. Mrs. Holub was employed at the Gregory County Local War Price and Rationing Office from 1942 to 1945. In the inside of the scrapbook, she wrote, Office of Price Administration, or it was also known as War Price and Rationing Office, was started around January 1st, 1942. I became the chief clerk of the Gregory County Local War Price and Rationing Office, number 6727, on April 22nd, 1942, and she left the OPA on December 31st, 1945. This collection, I picked this one also because it's very interesting that the scrapbook is quite tall, about 3 or 4 inches by about 14 inches, and it's pretty big, and it's full, and it's not bound very well because she glued so many things into the scrapbook, including pencils and erasers and any kind of office supply you can think of. She taped or glued into this scrapbook. So I thought that was kind of interesting. She kept copies of everything. This is so on the one side is a war ration certificate, and on the other side was a request for leave. And what pulled me to this collection was her handwriting on the inside of the scrapbook. She listed out the names of all the other people that worked in the office, the positions that they held, and special events that were noted, which you really couldn't get any other way. So that was really kind of cool. That was interesting to me. I had to pick a government record. I couldn't just stick with the manuscripts. So I found this Selective Service Historical Report for South Dakota from 40 to 47. It was written by compiled by Edward Beckwith, who was the state director of Selective Service. And he compiled this huge report. It's pretty massive. And he submitted it to Louis Hershey, who was the director of Selective Service in Washington, D.C. And Beckwith was the director from 1940 all the way up through the end, and then he compiled this report in 1947. It wasn't so much the beginning of the report that interested me, it was the appendices in the back that I found was very interesting. The beginning part of the report talked about the background of the state selective service system, the administration, all the different types of boards, but it was the back part that I liked. It had listings of personnel, the civilian personnel, names of local board members, appeals information from local boards, number of men in the service by county. And so this one is the South Dakota wartime crop production from 1941 to 45. And this is a listing, just 2 shots of it. I didn't do all of it, but this was Hughes County, names of all the local boards, of all the people that were involved in the local communities on the selective service. So I thought that was very interesting. What you might not know, I mean, I didn't talk too much about it, but the archives, we collect manuscript records and government records, and these are used by researchers who are writing books, who are working on films, who are doing family research. And so these types of records are very informative when you're looking back and trying to trace things down. You can find information on your family. Maybe you didn't know that your family was involved in one of these local boards. So I thought that was, whenever you find lists of names, that's pretty cool for us. It's very helpful. Another one of our collections that maybe you guys know about, if you've read one of the quarterlies, this is Edgar Gable's prison camp diary. Edgar was from Wagner, South Dakota, and he was actually a purchasing agent for an American mining company, and he was working in the Philippines at the time of the onset of the war. He was commissioned as a lieutenant and assigned to the Philippine Motor Transport Unit at the time of the Japanese attack. He was taken prisoner in 1942 and taken to a prison near Manila. Let's see, while he was there at this prison camp, he worked on farming duties, hospital work, built airfields, along with several thousand other American prisoners who were held at this prison. The interesting thing about Edgar is that he kept a diary the whole time he was there. And so on the one side, that's the copy of his diary, and on the left-hand side is the transcript of his diary. Only 3 men knew the exact location of the diary because he buried it, and so only 3 people knew where they were. The awesome part about this whole story, I mean, it's got some sad parts too, but only those 3 guys knew where the diary was, and the one surviving was able to go back and find it and dig it out and bring it back. So Edgar's story, he was transferred from Bilibid prison, where he was boarded onto a ship headed out of Manila. The boat was attacked by American planes, and several hundred American prisoners were killed, and including one of the 3. And Edgar was able to swim to shore and was taken prisoner again. And he and all the other American survivors were taken to another prison and then eventually loaded onto another Japanese freighter. This freighter was then attacked again by American aircraft, and this attack killed 250 soldiers, including Gable. So out of the 3, you've got 2 who had been killed, and so the one who survived the war came back to the United States and later went back to the prison and knew exactly where that diary was buried, dug it out, and brought it back. And so we have the diary, we have the transcript, and it's included in volume 30 of the Historical Society collections, if you want to read that. The actual diary itself is very, very difficult to read, so I'd suggest reading the transcript instead. Let's see, I found on one of our rolls of microfilm, and I liked this one because it was handwritten. Here again, I always tend towards the handwritten diaries, handwritten journals. I really lean toward those. This is a handwritten list of 88 names of Crow Creek Agency veterans that participated in World War II. I don't know too much about the provenance of this, and this is pretty much what we have, other than that first page that talks about that it was from, it indicates it was a United States document. But the interesting part are the crosses and the X marks where someone has indicated whether they were killed in action or died when they were home. So here again, names of people, very helpful for genealogists, very helpful for researchers, very helpful for anybody who is doing research on World War II. And lastly, this was supposed to be my teaser to get you guys to go, to hang on tight, but we actually were able to get this done this week. The Doolittle Raiders had a reunion in Rapid City in 1978, and we have the cassette tapes from that, and we recently sent those out to be digitized, and they got returned to our office, and I thought, oh, these are not going to get done in time for the history conference. They did, and we did some social media about that on Monday, so maybe you've already heard about this, but if you are interested in the Doolittle Raiders reunion and those interviews, you can go out to our YouTube. If you just look under YouTube, South Dakota State Archives, you'll see it. They're all out there. They've been transcribed, so you can read them as well. But the interviews include General James Doolittle, Henry Potter, Dick Cole, Father William Glynn, Richard Knobloch, and Lieutenant Travis Huber, and David Jones. And let's see, I believe it's Henry went by Hank, who is from Pierre. And then I believe Don Smith was from Belfouche. He is not on there, but I don't know, we didn't get him. But so I was going to tease you guys with that and tell you, oh, hang on tight, and then check our social media and check our YouTube page, but they are done and they are out there, so go listen to them. And that's how I'm going to end on my presentation. So go check out our YouTube page.
Where's Paul Higby? There you are. Were you taking notes? All right. So Renee Boen, who is our Director of Archaeology, could not be here. So I'm going to be showing you a presentation she put together about Belfouche, prisoner of war camps. And she started with big background. I'm not going to spend a lot of time there because I think you all know all this part, just to give you some context. And my bifocals don't like looking like that far. My bifocals, contact lenses, so I'm going to get out my prints here. So 1942, Great Britain needs some help from the United States to house POWs. There are over 400,000 captured German soldiers shipped by Pullman cars from New York City to camps in the South, Southwest, Midwest, and Great Plains. 2 of them were in Algona, Iowa, and Fort Robinson, Nebraska. There's also a labor shortage on U.S. farms and other industries. So trying to figure out, we've got these soldiers, we need this labor, how to put that together. So some of those German POWs in Iowa and Nebraska are transferred to a series of branch camps to work. And you see, Renee has these all mapped out very nicely where those branch camps were. So we've got Fort Meade in Ormond Camp, which is close to Belfouche. So here's some of the things these German POWs helped with. Harvest in Grant and Roberts counties. In Sioux Falls, they worked in the laundry. I'm not sure whose laundry that was, but in Yankton, they worked on flood protection projects. In Awana, some flood protection projects as well. And she's got more details there, helping out with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers on some of those flood projects. In 1945, the German POWs helped out with harvesting crops and renovating Fort Meade. And then in Ormond, close to Belfouche, they were harvesting beets and some other crops. And also working on the irrigation district there as well. And you see her note at the bottom for Fort Robinson that that base camp could house 3,000 POWs, and most of them were Rommel's elite Africa Corps. And here we have some pictures of the beet harvesting. Transportation, and then actually working those beet fields in 1945. And the tent camp south of the dam in Belle Fourche. So this goes back a little bit to explain where this camp at Belle Fourche came from, the dam. It was a CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps camp, that was then later outfitted as a POW camp. And so there's archaeological work being done there starting in 2016, and the red arrow indicates that location where the dig was going on. And the photo shows a lot of that dam work, and then the bottom photo is the image today. And another image from today. This camp, with its 3 different iterations, is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And this is a little closer look into the area that was under archaeological study, and the kinds of things that were found there and then monitored by the author. That would be Renee, not me. Though I would find this really fun. So they found building materials, machine parts, personal items. The only things that they really were able to identify as belonging to the POW camp were fragments of 4 beer bottles, a Jergens lotion bottle, and an assault rifle cartridge. I think that we've outlined the barracks that were part of that camp. And Renee has kind of traced out what happened from the various branch camps, how many there were there, what the numbers were. 174 to 218 POWs doing the laundry in Sioux Falls, for example. And Renee's got her sources listed out there on the side as well. So this, for me, is a really interesting part of World War II history of South Dakota that is new to me, and very fun to see all of this research coming together from the various parts of the Historical Society. So thank you to Renee for that. So I'm going to stop being Renee now. And next, I'm Catherine. So Catherine Forsch is working very hard to get ready for our reception tonight, and so she asked that I point out to you in your registration packets, there is a stapled together document that's labeled Statewide Oral History Project, and this is a really large endeavor that needs to be done, and Catherine would love for you to take a look at that. It's a statewide oral history project to preserve South Dakota stories. You heard the excitement about the cassette tapes from the Doolittle reunion being transcribed. Those are the kinds of things that we want to be able to capture before the people who know those stories are no longer able to tell them to us. And so there are some themes that have been created, some great committees formed. The people who will be doing a lot of the interviewing are journalists and people who have been trained throughout their careers to interview people. They know how to ask questions, to get stories. And so some of the areas that we're starting with are South Dakota politics from 1970 to the mid-1990s, and changing times of women from the 1960s forward. Try to get a lot of the stories, especially around the state commission on the status of women. That's one of the areas that is specifically being targeted to get those stories. And The document lists out who's on the Oral History Task Force. Shelley's part of that. Brad Tennant's part of that. Some great historical minds from all different aspects of the craft of historians coming together for this. So take a look at this at your leisure, and just to kind of see if that's something that you would like to get involved in. We would appreciate that. All right, now I'll be myself. So the press, you've heard about one of our big projects. So we wanted to have some books released in conjunction with this conference about World War II. So you all know all about A Place for Harvest, but I'm going to skip over to what you're going to hear. What you're going to hear tomorrow. American Ace by Hector Curiel is the story of Joe Foss, fighter pilot, and it is a graphic biography. So think kind of like comic strips. And Hector painstakingly created all of these. And it's been really fun to see this book released. It just was released earlier this week, but Ben Jones and Hector presented a copy to Frank Foss, Joe Foss's son, and all kinds of interviews have been done. And so this is a really new world for us to do graphic biography, and we really have really enjoyed this project. It's a good one. So look forward to hearing about this from Hector tomorrow. COVID was bad timing for a lot of books, especially Paul Higby's first strike. He had all of these book talks lined up, and every one of them, I think, got canned. So don't forget to check out Paul's book, because he's going to talk to us about that tomorrow as well, the Doolittle Raid and Don Smith. And as Shelley mentioned, various issues of our now in its 52nd year journal, South Dakota History, have covered aspects of World War II. I didn't grab the one that Shelley was talking about, because that was in the historical document series that preceded the quarterly. But in 1993, we had a theme issue on World War II, and we have a couple of copies left of that are available. My favorite piece in here is about the pheasant sandwiches served in Aberdeen to the soldiers, the many, many soldiers that passed through Aberdeen. But there are a lot of other fun articles in here. And then just last fall, we published a piece by Paul Higby and Terry Neal King on the cadets in Spearfish. It's the 93rd U.S. Army Air Force College Training Detachment in Spearfish from 1943 to 1944. And so those are a few of the publications that the South Dakota Historical Society Press is putting out there over the years, has been, and it will continue to try to illuminate that part of our state's history. So that concludes this last panel for today. I do want to advise you for going over to the reception, which starts at 5:30, so you got to give us a little time to set up. And if you are one of our speakers, we have you registered at the Governor's Inn, 2 doors down, so you might want to go over there. And at the Missouri Avenue Events Center, which is a few blocks, its location is Central and Missouri. Go in the side door. There's a sign that faces the street that says there's some state offices there, but you want to go in the side door, and that will bring you right in. So thank you so much for your attention this afternoon, and we'll see you at the reception.
And last announcement before you leave, sorry, Don Zeller, you won the raffle, so make sure you go talk to Holly.